Hi, and welcome to Brain Binge. We're glad you've joined us for another deep dive. Hope you're doing well, whether you're trying to fall asleep, on a long drive, cleaning, or just escaping for a bit. Today, we are wrestling with a scenario that underpins pretty much every modern convenience and, I guess, every modern vulnerability. We're going to explore a radical thought experiment, one that's actually really difficult to wrap your head around. What happens when the invisible force that powers absolutely everything, electricity, suddenly disappears?
Everywhere, tomorrow, indefinitely.
Exactly.
Indefinitely.
It's a thought experiment that it immediately takes us past the idea of a local storm outage, you know, the kind of thing you prepare for with candles and board games.
Right.
This forces us to confront our total, and I mean total, dependence. Most people, when they think about a power outage, they just visualize darkness. But that's the smallest, most easily mitigated part of the disaster.
It really is. The hook here, and what we want to get into, is that electricity isn't just a convenience. It's like the hidden bloodstream of modern life. That's a great way to put it.
If you remove it, you trigger this immediate, rapid, and catastrophic chain reaction. It affects every single facet of modern existence. I just want you, listening right now, to visualize your day instantly stopping.
Right.
Your phone stops charging, the traffic lights go out, the coffee machine goes cold, the computer at your office just dies. Now stretch that feeling out forever. That's really the mission of this deep dive, understanding the complex mechanism of collapse.
And what's fascinating here, and also terrifying, is how quickly that interruption to comfort becomes an existential threat to survival.
Yes.
Particularly in dense urban environments. We've built a world that's, optimized for global efficiency, all under the assumption of continuous high-capacity power.
An assumption we never even think about.
Never. And when you remove that one assumption, the entire structure doesn't just wobble, it collapses inward. And not slowly, but catastrophically fast.
Okay, let's unpack this enormous premise. Let's jump right into section 1. The invisible backbone, our total dependence. We really need to establish in, granular detail why a large-scale power failure is such an existential threat to our cities.
It's all about the critical infrastructure we take for granted.
Until it's gone. Let's start with the absolute foundation of civilized life: water and sanitation. Tell us why a lack of electricity means we stop having clean, flowing water, and just how fast that system fails.
Well, it's a failure of mechanics and control. Modern cities don't operate on natural gravity feed alone. Not anymore.
So it's not like the old Roman aqueducts.
Not at all. Especially for these vast metropolises that draw water from sources that are miles away or from deep underground aquifers. We rely entirely on electrically powered pumps for pretty much everything. Lift, distribution, all of it.
So these pumps are what move the raw water from, say, a reservoir or a river.
Right from the source to the municipal treatment plants. And that's just the first step.
So stage 1 failure is just getting the water to the plant. What happens at the plant itself?
Well, that's stage 2, and it's another massive point of failure. Treatment facilities are huge consumers of power. They need electricity to run high-speed mixers, chemical feeders for disinfection, injecting chlorine.
All the stuff that makes it safe to drink.
Exactly. And all the instrumentation that constantly monitors water quality. A lot of that is governed by these complex digital SCADA systems.
Yeah.
Supervisory control and data acquisition. They're basically the digital brains of the operation.
Yep.
So without electricity, you lose the chemical control, you lose the monitoring, and you lose the ability to process water safely.
So even if the raw water could somehow magically reach the plant, it couldn't be made potable.
Yeah.
And then stage 3 is distribution, which I'm guessing that also relies on pumps.
Precisely. Once the water is treated, you need these high-pressure booster pumps to push that clean water through miles and miles of pressurized pipes, especially over hills or, really critically, up into the higher floors of apartment buildings and skyscrapers.
Yeah.
Someone living on the ground floor might have a little bit of residual pressure for a short time, but anyone on the 10th floor or higher, they lose water almost instantly once those local booster stations fail.
So the moment the power dies, that entire multi-stage process, source, treatment, distribution, it just freezes all at once.
Simultaneously. And the sewage system. It faces the exact same failure mode, only the implications are much more toxic.
Right, because that's not just an inconvenience, that's a health hazard.
It's an immediate health catastrophe waiting to happen. It also relies on lift stations and pumps to move waste uphill or over long distances to the treatment facilities.
So a toilet might flush once or twice from the tank.
Maybe. but the transport system that carries it away fails almost instantly. The sheer volume of waste generated by millions of people just stops moving. It starts to backflow.
And without the treatment facilities operating, there's no powered aeration, no chemical processing. The city just becomes toxic.
Almost overnight. It creates an immediate and severe hygiene risk, which is so often the hidden killer in these kinds of disaster scenarios. Yeah. If waste isn't moving out of the city and clean water isn't moving in, the conditions for disease outbreaks, cholera, dysentery, they skyrocket within days, especially in hot weather.
Terrifying. Okay, now let's talk about food, which is probably what most people would think of first. We are so far removed from the actual process of getting food onto our plates.
The modern food chain is astonishingly fragile, and it's dependent on electricity at every single stage. We're not talking about a local farm with a few chickens.
No, this is industrial agriculture.
Exactly. Vast powered irrigation systems, massive industrial processes for making fertilizers and pesticides, and all these high-capacity electric motors driving grain handling, sorting, processing plants.
And even if the crops were harvested and processed without power, the clock starts ticking the moment the grid dies, specifically because of what you call the cold chain.
The cold chain is the unsung hero of food safety, and it's the single point of mass failure for modern diets.
And what is it exactly?
It's the continuous unbroken refrigeration that keeps meat, dairy, produce, and frozen foods safe all the way from the farm through slaughterhouses, processing, distribution centers, and right up to the supermarket shelf. A supermarket is essentially just a vast custom-built refrigeration unit.
And these places, these big distribution centers, they have backup generators, but they only have so much fuel, right?
Correct. Maybe enough for 48 to 72 hours max. Once those backups run out of fuel, and remember, fuel itself can't be pumped without power, those temperatures start to drift.
And all that food starts to go bad.
All of it. The vast quantity of perishable food, which is most of what people in developed nations eat, becomes rotten waste very quickly. We are talking about tens of thousands of tons of meat and dairy spoiling almost at the same time in any major city.
But there's a deeper technical issue here too, isn't there? It's about logistics, the just-in-time system. Why is the failure of digital inventory just as bad as the failure of refrigeration?
Because JIT is the backbone of efficiency. It means there's no massive strategic stockpile of food just sitting in a warehouse.
So we don't have months of food saved up.
We don't. Cities typically operate with only about 3 to 5 days worth of food stock inside the metropolitan area. They rely on continuous daily resupply. And this entire system is managed digitally. Inventory tracking, automated ordering, scheduling. It's all handled by powered servers.
It means
the moment the power dies, not only does refrigeration fail, but the ability to manually track or locate or even allocate the remaining stock just ceases to exist.
So they wouldn't even know what they had.
Or where it was supposed to go.
Yeah.
That highly efficient but very fragile JIT model turns a food shortage into a resource allocation nightmare almost instantly.
Wow. Okay, moving from sustaining life to saving life. Healthcare. Hospitals must be the ultimate power consumers. They have redundancies, but they're still incredibly vulnerable to an indefinite failure.
They are massive, complex power sinks. They need constant electricity for basic lighting, sure, but far more critically for maintaining sterilization equipment, operating theaters, and all that complex life-saving machinery.
Ventilators, dialysis machines.
Incubators. And these machines often draw a huge amount of power. They can't run indefinitely on a simple battery pack. They're designed for short outages, assuming the grid will come back on.
What about the unseen dependencies? The things we don't think about, like patient records or lab work.
The dependency is total. Hospitals rely on electronic records, high-resolution imaging equipment like MRIs and CT scanners, advanced lag equipment for diagnostics. It's all powered.
And medication?
The pharmaceutical vulnerability is immense. So many critical medicines, vaccines, and biologics require strict, powered cold storage. Without reliable, continuous refrigeration, those stockpiles become useless within hours.
So it creates a secondary crisis for chronic patients.
Exactly. People who rely on them daily are suddenly cut off. And the sheer volume of all these powered systems means the generator fuel consumption is just astronomical.
Okay, let's talk about movement and information. Logistics and communication. Even if a truck runs on diesel, it's eventually going to be stopped by the environment we've created, right?
Absolutely. The problem isn't the engine, it's the infrastructure around it. Traffic lights, railway signaling, air traffic control, it all requires electricity. Cities quickly become impassable because of chaotic, unmanaged intersections.
But the simplest, most paralyzing bottleneck is the fuel pump.
That's the one. A diesel truck is useless once it runs empty because fuel stations cannot get fuel out of their underground tanks or pump it into vehicles without power. They rely on the grid or on backup generators that will fail quickly.
So logistics, which rely on all this tight scheduling and powered infrastructure like automated warehouses and container ports, it all grinds to a halt.
And communication freezes at the exact same time.
Yeah.
Mobile phone networks, these enormous fiber optic data centers, internet exchanges, the stations that power undersea cables, they all have to have electricity.
A cell tower has a battery, though.
For maybe 4 to 8 hours. Then it switches to a small generator that needs refueling. So even if your phone has battery life, it's totally irrelevant if the network backbone it connects to has died.
So all digital information exchange, finance, coordination, it just stops.
Completely.
Yeah.
It's stunning how tightly interconnected it all is.
So the key takeaway here is this synergy of failure.
That's the phrase. Electricity is not a separate service. It is the universal lubricant that allows every other critical system, water, food, health, finance, to function. When the power goes, it's not a temporary inconvenience. It triggers a systemic collapse that transforms a modern city into a highly complex, resource-scarce trap almost instantly.
Okay, we've established the baseline of our dependence. Now we move into the actual event itself. Section 2, the immediate shock. Let's imagine that exact moment. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., zero power everywhere. What are those first few moments like on the ground?
There's an immediate, unnatural quiet.
The hum is gone.
The hum of the city ceases. Lights die. Computers shut down. Elevators freeze mid-ascent. The most visible, chaos-inducing impact is the traffic lights going dark, which causes instant, massive gridlock at busy intersections. But psychologically, the dominant response is almost always disbelief.
And annoyance.
And annoyance, yes, because we are conditioned to assume system reliability. We assume this is just a power cut, a local storm, maybe? We just wait for that click that signifies the quick fix.
That initial assumption is so important, isn't it? Because if people truly believed the power was gone forever, the panic would be instant.
On total. But because they assume it's fixable, an hour, maybe 2, they fail to take the essential life-preserving steps. They try to save their phone battery instead of finding a source of water or getting physical cash.
So what does that resource scramble look like in those first few hours before the gravity of the situation really sinks in?
Everyone tries desperately to connect. They switch to battery power. Phones, laptops, flashlights. They're trying to get news on social media or contact family. And if the mobile networks are still running on their backup power,
It flooded.
instantly overloaded, even if the outage is nationwide. The remaining communication bandwidth is just saturated by millions of simultaneous attempts to connect. The available window to communicate is incredibly small.
And once those tower generators run out of fuel or the battery banks drain,
Communication effectively reverts to physical proximity. Or, long-range amateur radio systems that only a tiny fraction of the population have or even understand how to use.
at the same time, the entire economic system starts seizing up. Card payments, the lifeblood of modern commerce, are just dead.
Instantly unreliable. ATMs are dark, locking people out of their own money. Shops that can stay open, maybe working manually in the daylight, suddenly find that physical cash is the only viable medium of exchange.
So people who rely solely on digital payments or who don't keep cash at home, they're suddenly very vulnerable.
Their financial fluidity is gone. Cash, which we often think of as archaic, suddenly regains its absolute centrality.
And meanwhile, in the critical facilities, the hospitals, they switch to immediate triage.
They activate their backup generators instantly, usually within seconds. Non-essential, elective procedures are postponed or canceled right away. Staff prioritize life support machines, the ER, the ICUs.
But the quiet calculation is already happening.
It is. The facilities director is assessing fuel consumption. A typical large hospital might burn hundreds of gallons of diesel an hour. They know instantly that they're on a countdown, usually measured in days, not weeks.
It becomes a desperate inventory management problem. How much life can we afford to power?
Precisely. They're assessing which patients can be manually sustained, which machines are absolutely essential, and which patients require specialized cold chain medication that they only have a short supply of. The decision-making starts immediately under immense stress.
Now let's look at water and food in those first 24 hours. The initial status is deceptively calm, isn't it?
Yes. For many people, water still flows initially. There's residual pressure in the pipes or gravity feed from local water towers. But like we discussed, high-rise dwellers lose their water very quickly.
And the instinctive public reaction?
To fill every available container, bathtubs, bottles, pots, anything.
Yeah.
And that just-in-case reaction is the single most crucial, immediate preparatory move a civilian can make.
And food is still safe for now because of insulation?
Correct. The insulation in fridges and freezers can hold temperatures for several hours, so there's no mass, immediate spoilage. Most people don't lose their refrigerated goods on day one.
But the staff in the commercial cold chain supermarkets, warehouses, they know the clock is ticking.
They know the time they have is incredibly short, maybe 6 to 12 hours before temperatures compromise the safety of massive quantities of stock. They're frantically trying to organize sales or just clear the shelves before the spoilage event begins.
What about transport chaos beyond the traffic lights?
Underground trains and electric trams stop dead, trapping thousands of commuters. Petrol and diesel cars can still drive, but the lack of traffic control, combined with accidents and bottlenecks around the few fuel stations trying to operate, leads to widespread and rapid gridlock.
And air travel.
Airspace is immediately restricted. Air traffic control systems struggle to manage flights on emergency modes, forcing widespread ground stops. They would halt all non-essential commercial traffic to focus only on landing the planes already in the air, relying on backup systems that are not designed for long-term use.
So psychologically, this first day is defined by confusion and hope.
And the assumption of normalcy. People conserve resources, but they wait. Only the very few who grasp the indefinite nature of the failure start truly preparing, securing physical water sources, locating non-perishable food, and planning for movement.
And the information breakdown is key here. The lack of reliable news allows rumors to just define the atmosphere.
Absolutely. Information is gold. People are seeking any broadcast that's still operating battery radios, car radios. And in the absence of clear communication from official sources, rumors spread like wildfire.
Rumors about neighboring towns having power or about the cause of the failure.
Whether it's natural or malicious. The critical failure of day one is the majority's inability to grasp the severity, the distinction between a temporary outage and a true permanent grid collapse.
Okay, so day one is about managing shock and using backups. But day 2 through 7, the first week, that's when the true systemic crisis hits. This is when the backup systems run dry, the reserves are depleted, and the realization finally sinks in. The power is not coming back.
This is when the cascade failure accelerates into full collapse mode. The psychological shift moves from hope to genuine visceral fear. When those official statements, however intermittent, confirm that the damage is global and indefinite, the dynamic shifts. It goes from inconvenience to existential disruption, and we see human behavior tested immediately.
Let's start again with water and hygiene. By day 2 or 3, the systemic failure is total, especially in cities.
The stored reserves and residual pressures are gone. Taps are bone dry across almost all high-density residential areas because all the large-scale pumping has ceased, and reservoir levels are dropping without replenishment.
So bottled water becomes like gold.
Incredibly scarce. It leads to immediate conflict and competition at any organized and usually very short-lived distribution point.
And the sanitation failure is now a full-blown public health catastrophe.
It's unavoidable. Toilets stop functioning reliably across cities because there's no water pressure for flushing, and the sewage lift stations are paralyzed. Waste backs up into basements, streets, public spaces.
Which creates immediate mass hygiene problems.
And we forget that modern cities are only livable because we manage waste and provide clean water. When you remove those services, the environment itself becomes hostile. Disease risk skyrockets exponentially.
Okay, moving to food. The spoilage point. We're past that initial cold chain window. What is the state of food security by the middle of the first week?
By day 3, fridges and freezers have warmed up to ambient temperature. Vast quantities of perishable food are now compromised or actively rotting. This creates not just a resource loss, but a biohazard issue.
And the supermarkets.
They're either completely cleared by legitimate, panicked buying or increasingly by opportunistic looting, because supply chains have utterly failed. No fuel, no functioning digital inventory, no power delivery systems means no restocking is possible.
And the panic buying just accelerates this, right? It turns a manageable 3 to 5 day stock into nothing within 48 hours.
Human psychology is key here. The fear of scarcity dictates behavior. People prioritize their immediate family's survival, which leads to a breakdown of any orderly distribution. Hoarding becomes rational behavior from an individual's perspective, but it guarantees mass shortages for the rest of the community.
The healthcare tipping point. This has to be the most harrowing detail of this first week. When the generator fuel runs low, the system fundamentally breaks.
It moves from triage to the genuine rationing of life itself.
What does that mean?
When fuel reserves hit critical lows, hospital staff are forced to make decisions about which complex machines must be shut down. Ventilators, dialysis machines, incubators, they cannot all be sustained. The ethical and moral burden on those professionals becomes immense, deciding who gets access to the last remaining hours of life-sustaining power.
And outside the hospitals, what happens to patients who rely on regular specialized care?
Chronic patients suffer disproportionately. Think of people who rely on dialysis or people needing regular medication that requires precise cold storage. Without the centralized medical infrastructure or the ability to power their personal equipment, these individuals face incredibly high mortality rates. Society just loses the ability to support its most vulnerable populations.
The communication breakdown also becomes total by this point, which has to severely limit any organized governmental response.
Digital infrastructure fails completely. The internet is gone. Mobile communication is dead. Authorities lose the essential ability to coordinate logistics, manage emergency responses, or even reliably inform the public.
So centralized command structures just fall apart?
They're replaced by localized, isolated decision-making. Everything reverts to vastly slower methods. Physical messengers, runners, paper records, which are hopelessly inadequate for coordinating relief in a city of millions.
This breakdown of coordination must heavily influence the shift in social order. We hear these competing narratives: cooperation versus chaos. How likely are communities to maintain order in a high-density, resource-scarce environment?
That's a critical challenge. We often romanticize the resilient community model, and it does happen. Some groups show remarkable self-organization, sharing resources, establishing local defense, checking on vulnerable neighbors. But history shows that those initial community efforts are often quickly overridden by organized predation or just widespread desperation. In a dense urban environment with 5 million people, that resilient model is highly vulnerable to groups driven by self-interest and superior organization in securing the last remaining resources.
So the managed crisis turns into an immediate security crisis.
It does. Law enforcement, which is already hampered by communication failure and fuel shortages, becomes severely overstretched and localized. The power vacuum gets filled by those who can control physical resources, like a water purification point or a remaining cache of food.
This disruption fundamentally changes the economic structure almost instantly. What happens to the value of labor?
This is one of the most immediate and profound shifts. Modern service-based jobs, anything tied to an office, a factory relying on automation, financial services, online commerce, they become impossible.
They lose all value overnight.
All of it. Suddenly, the most critical individuals are those who possess physical, non-electric skills. A plumber who can fix manual systems, a mechanic who can work without diagnostic computers, a farmer who can produce food locally, a carpenter who uses hand tools. Their value skyrockets because they contribute directly to immediate physical survival.
So money becomes secondary to bartering.
For physical goods, skills, and labor, yes.
So this first week, then, is a decisive psychological and sociological shift.
It moves past the theoretical to the intensely practical and, frankly, brutal. The questions people start asking reflect this. Is it safer to stay in the city where resources are technically centralized but sanitation is failing? Or should we flee to the rural areas, accepting the risks of travel but seeking greater self-sufficiency? The highly fragile, high-density urban environment proved to be the least resilient place to be.
Now we're stretching the thought experiment past weeks and into months or even years. The power grid is gone permanently, globally. This is Section 4, the long haul. It forces us to confront an entirely new, radically less complex, and significantly poorer society.
This stage involves a deep, rapid technological regression. And we're not just talking about losing the iPhone. We're losing the infrastructure necessary to produce steel, concrete, advanced manufacturing components. Many technologies we consider basic today, large-scale data storage, mass telecom, most advanced medicine, they simply become impossible to maintain or replicate.
Society reverts to older methods, mechanical tools, human labor, animal power. But here is where it gets really interesting for me. The knowledge loss. We've digitized everything. If the power is gone, what happens to all that information, all that human endeavor locked away in servers?
This is a catastrophe of historical proportions. Digital knowledge becomes almost entirely inaccessible. Think about the specific types of data lost. Not just personal photos, but crucial geospatial mapping, historical climate modeling, complex industrial schematics for things like turbines and water treatment systems, and the vast archives of modern scientific research.
If it wasn't printed, memorized, or mechanically stored, it's effectively lost.
It is. And even the physical vulnerability of the storage itself is an issue. We assume solid-state drives hold information forever.
They don't.
Solid-state drives and magnetic storage require periodic power refreshing to maintain data integrity. Over months or years without power, data degradation and loss are inevitable. The server farms themselves, the physical infrastructure of the internet, are just useless hulks of metal.
The physical book, suddenly, is the primary repository of knowledge again, which means technical survival guides, historical records that predate the digital age, they become priceless artifacts.
It absolutely regains its primary status. The vast libraries of human knowledge that exist only on powered servers just vanish. Consequently, the people who possess practical, memorized knowledge, how to build a reliable water wheel, how to treat an infectious disease without antibiotics, how to forge and repair iron tools, they become the new societal experts.
Let's discuss the new energy reality. If the industrial grid is gone, what energy sources remain viable for a new adapting world?
We're primarily restricted to direct energy sources: fire, biomass, basic wind, and water power. Now, if this scenario allows for existing small-scale generation off-grid solar panels on rooftops, small wind turbines, micro-hydro systems that were established before the collapse, then those localized points of power become crucial, highly defended centers of functionality.
But the industrial fuels we rely on now, petrol and diesel, are they just a temporary resource?
Highly finite. Without electrically powered extraction, pumping, and refining processes, the oil in the ground stays in the ground. The existing stockpiles of refined fuel are all we have.
So they'd become precious.
Highly rationed commodities, likely reserved only for critical agricultural tilling or necessary medical transport. Mass commuting, industrial processes, and long-haul shipping stop completely once those reserves are exhausted. We shift from fossil fuel dependence to immediate renewable and biomass dependence, whether we're ready for it or not.
This means the food system has to undergo a complete and dramatic transformation to survive the long haul.
Industrial agriculture, dependent as it is on diesel tractors, synthetic fertilizers, and huge irrigation systems, cannot survive. Yields would drop significantly, maybe by 70 to 90% in industrialized areas. This forces a radical shift.
A shift to what?
To local, labor-intensive gardening, farming, and foraging. The focus moves entirely to what can be grown with local manure, harvested by hand or animal power, and critically stored without refrigeration or long-distance shipping.
So diets would completely reorganize?
Completely. They'd be focused on grains, dried beans, preserved meats like cured or smoked products, and fermented foods. The era of high-calorie, globally sourced diets ends.
This has to fundamentally change the dynamic between cities and the countryside.
Modern cities are fundamentally consumption machines. They cannot sustain themselves without massive food and water imports and powered infrastructure. So you can expect significant depopulation. People will seek more resilient rural areas, places with access to fertile land, moving water sources, timber for heat and construction, and a lower population density.
So the political and economic power structure itself shifts away from centralized markets and capital.
Absolutely. Centralized states, which rely on digital tax collection, fast communication, and rapid military and police transport to maintain control, they weaken significantly. Political power consolidates locally. It moves to those who control physical, defensible resources, fertile land, local energy generation, and organized groups capable of self-defense and local governance.
You're describing a return to a sort of feudal or localized barter economy.
Yes, based on agricultural output and practical skills. The complexity of governing 8 billion people with instant communication is replaced by the necessary simplicity of local rule based on physical presence and control of resources.
And the ultimate determinant of success in this new environment.
It won't just be individual survivalism. It will be the communities that can maintain trust, cooperation, and the ability to share labor in defense. Internal conflict, driven by scarcity and fear, remains the biggest long-term threat.
It's a powerful lesson. The world can survive without electricity, but the world as we know it, with its current population size and level of convenience, cannot.
Precisely. The long-term world without electricity is one with dramatically fewer people, less complex supply chains, dramatically slower communication, and a radically different sense of distance and time. It is a massive societal step backwards, but it is survivable for those who can adapt quickly.
That's a sobering picture, but it brings us to our final analytical section, which offers a kind of blueprint for resilience. We need to shift the focus from collapse to adaptation by examining communities that already operate outside of total electrical dependence.
This is a vital corrective.
Yeah.
We tend to view this scenario purely through the lens of loss, the loss of what we have. But globally, large populations already live with intermittent or even non-existent grid access. Their adaptation techniques aren't some esoteric new knowledge. They are simply tried and true methods that the developed world discarded in favor of electrical convenience.
Let's look at the off-grid blueprint. Those households in developed nations who consciously stepped away from the grid. They have skills that suddenly become absolutely essential.
Off-grid households are already masters of managing limited resources in a sustainable loop. They typically use small-scale solar panels and battery banks for lighting and communications, wood-burning stoves for heat and cooking, often rainwater collection systems, and composting toilets for sanitation.
They already operate with a different mindset regarding power consumption, right? They treat electricity as a precious, earned resource, not an infinite utility.
And crucially, they're accustomed to performing maintenance, repairing their own equipment, growing a portion of their own food, and functioning without immediate resupply from external systems. They are practicing resilient living as a default. Their knowledge of physical, low-tech solutions is immense.
And we can look globally at subsistence and traditional communities too, whose entire survival framework is based on non-electric living.
Absolutely. Think of populations around the world that use hand tools, animal power for tilling and transport, and simple machines in daily life. When it comes to food, they rely almost entirely on non-electric storage techniques that suddenly become essential for everyone.
Like large-scale drying.
Drying of grains, fruits, meats, smoking, curing, salting, fermenting, all of those become critical skills.
And their social structures are built on robust, in-person social networks rather than relying on digital communication.
That's resilience in the social domain. In a deep dive collapse scenario like this, the strength of the relationships in your immediate physical community becomes your primary safety net, not your digital address book. These communities have retained the necessary structure for localized trust and cooperation.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, the renaissance of practical knowledge. We talked about knowledge loss, but these skills represent knowledge retention.
Yes, skills once considered old-fashioned regain centrality overnight. Think of blacksmithing, the ability to forge and repair the metal tools necessary for agriculture and construction.
Or carpentry with only hand tools.
Traditional herbal medicine, which becomes necessary when centralized pharma supply chains collapse. And crucially, food preservation and preparation without modern ovens or mixers.
In a world where digital blueprints are lost, the ability to physically make, fix, and grow things becomes the ultimate currency. It completely reverses our societal value structure.
It creates a new hierarchy of utility. The abstract value of, say, financial engineering or high-level administration is zero. The physical value of a skilled mechanic, a farmer, a miller, or a doctor with knowledge of practical, non-electric surgical techniques is infinite.
And finally, let's talk about psychological preparedness, which often seems abstract, but is maybe the most valuable asset of all.
People who have lived through real instability, whether it's natural disasters, periods of war, or severe economic collapse, they possess a crucial asset. They have a realistic mental model of system fragility.
They don't assume someone is coming to save them.
They don't operate under the assumption that the government, the utility company, or the grid will save them in time. They understand that systemic failure is possible, and therefore, they are proactive.
So what are the practical habits that reflect this crucial mindset? Things that anyone could adopt now.
They practice simple, common-sense habits, maintaining a small, rotating stockpile of water and non-perishable food, keeping physical cash reserves, storing physical maps, and developing a flexible, problem-solving mindset under extreme stress.
They don't freeze and panic.
They immediately start assessing resources and planning the next logical, small step forward. This is the difference between panic and preparation. And in the post-electric world we've envisioned, these resilient individuals and communities, whether off-grid pioneers or those from traditional backgrounds, will become vital teachers, leaders, and essential hubs for the fragmented society that's trying to rebuild. They hold the practical blueprints for humanity's adaptation.
That was a tremendous deep dive into the profound cost of convenience and a hard look at the sheer fragility of our technological cocoon.
This thought experiment isn't just a contemplation of doom. It's a powerful revelation about the extreme interdependence of modern life. We've successfully externalized almost all of our survival needs, water, food, safety, into these highly optimized, interconnected systems powered by a force we rarely even think about.
Right.
It forces us to appreciate the astonishing complexity and tight coupling that allows 8 billion people to live this way.
It's a critical wake-up call. It forces you to look around your environment right now and ask, if that hidden bloodstream stopped in this moment, where are my true vulnerabilities? Is it the water in the tap? Is it the digital knowledge I rely on? It's not about fear. It's about acknowledging the reality that complexity often breeds systemic fragility.
And realizing that the most effective resilience often comes not from purchasing complex high-tech solutions, but from retaining low-tech knowledge, fostering practical skills, and above all, building strong community cooperation. The future, should we lose the grid, belongs to those who can make things locally.
A truly sobering but deeply insightful analysis of what we trade for comfort. If you enjoyed this deep dive, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe so more people can find Brain Binge. Thanks for listening and have a blessed day.
That's it for this episode of Brain Binge. If you enjoyed getting your mind twisted tonight, do me a favor, comment, like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive. Got a weird fact, mystery, or place you want an episode about? Drop it in the comments. I read as many as I can, and I'm always hunting for new ideas. Thanks for listening, and thanks for letting your brain binge with me for a while. Stay well, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.